Rapporteur's report and his opening remarks. Cambodia is in the midst of yet another ruling party-created crisis. In the July 28 national elections, the Cambodian People's Party, in power since 1979, controlled and used in a partisan manner all official election-related bodies. This included the National Election Committee and the Constitutional Council, both of which failed to address credible allegations of voter fraud and other irregularities. As a result, the Cambodian people have yet again been deprived of a free and fair election. Government attempts to block peaceful demonstrations demanding an independent investigation into election irregularities have ended in unnecessary or excessive use of force against protesters and bystanders. Without an independent investigation, the opposition is refusing to take up seats in the National Assembly. Meanwhile, the government continues to commit serious human rights violations throughout the country. National and local authorities collude with land-grabbing investors, dispossessing the poor and trampling on their rights. On top of this, land rights protesters are threatened with arrest or violence. Intimidation and criminal prosecutions against defenders and political activists have also become commonplace. The Khmer language media is almost completely controlled by the ruling party. The government has made no progress in addressing impunity that has characterized the administration of Prime Minister Hun Sen over his 28 years in power. Today, the Supreme Court has reheard the case against Hun Sen and Sop Simon, two men who were wrongfully convicted and imprisoned for the 2004 murder of Labour leader Chia Vichir. The charges should be dropped against them, and the world awaits the verdict. We call on the Human Rights Council to continue its scrutiny of Cambodia's precarious and worrying human rights situation and renew the Special Rapporteur's mandate for 2 years. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor next to the International Federation for Human Rights Leagues.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Speaker, FIDH and its member organizations, ad hoc and LICADO, are deeply concerned about the ongoing serious and systematic violations of land and housing rights, the intimidation and harassment of Cambodian human rights defenders, and the stifling of independent voices. Land grabbing and illegal forced evictions continue unabated. Evictions are carried out without due process, and those who protest are targeted by the authorities. Land rights activist Yom Bopha, who was pivotal in the protests of the Bangkok Lake community in Phnom Penh, was convicted on trumped-up charges. September 4th marked the first anniversary of her detention. Human rights defenders, NGO workers, activists and journalists continue to be subjected to threats, intimidation and harassment. Peaceful protesters face intimidation and violence. The lack of an independent judiciary makes it possible for the authorities to target independent voices and critics, and impunity is widespread. There are still no suspects for the murders of environmental activist Chutwuti and of journalist Hang Sere Udom. Mr. Special Rapporteur, your successive reports highlighted the systematic nature of human rights violations in Cambodia, and your last report stressed the very poor performance of the Cambodian government in promoting and protecting human rights. With regard to electoral reform, none of your recommendations has been implemented, leading to contested election results. The authorities have used excessive lethal force to suppress the last series of protests by opposition supporters, and no later than 3 days ago, law enforcement officials looked on as thugs attacked a group of protesters, reporters and photographers. Given the situation on the ground and disturbing developments such as blatant lack of cooperation by the government, who even launched a smear campaign against you, Mr. Special Rapporteur, the Human Rights Council should adopt a strong resolution reflecting the issues, concerns and lack of progress you identified. We call on the Council to renew your mandate for a period of at least 2 years. I thank you.
I thank you. I give the floor next to International Catholic Bureau.
Madam Vice President, Special Rapporteur, in Cambodia, serious human rights abuses continue to be perpetrated, including forced evictions and attacks against civilians and activists. Last year, Human Rights Now conducted a fact-finding mission to investigate the land grabbings in Kratche, Bangkok Lake, and Borei Kela in Phnom Penh. We found forced evictions in the 3 cases. There were no legal grounds, and these constituted violations of land rights. Although the government declared a moratorium of economic land concessions, these land concessions continue to be authorized in 2013, and most farmers still do not have land titles. Throughout 2012, the arbitrary arrest, detention, and prosecution against human rights defenders acting on land rights issues are perpetrated by the government, including the detention and prosecution of the radio owner Monsonando, imprisonment of 2 female housing activists, Tin Sakmoni and Yon Bopa. Ms. Bopa has been in jail for over 1 year now. We also witnessed the police and military use violence against civilians, resulting in the killing of a 14-year-old girl in Karachi last year and of a young man in the course of the post-election protests this month. These violations have been normalized in Cambodia. We express grave concern over the human rights situation and request the Council to extend the mandate of the Special Rapporteur. We urge the Council to closely monitor the situation and strongly urge the Cambodian government to end violence against civilians, to enforce evictions and attacks against human rights activists. Thank you.
That was the speaker from Human Rights. Now I give the floor next to the distinguished representative from Amnesty International.
Madam Vice President, Amnesty International is concerned with the deteriorating situation of human rights defenders in Cambodia and by the role of the justice system in restricting their work. As the Special Rapporteur highlights, quote, judges continue to use the provisions of the Criminal Code against human rights defenders, unquote. Housing rights activist Yon Bopa has been in prison since September 2012, convicted on spurious grounds after an unfair trial. The courts continue to allow impunity for perpetrators of human rights violations, including against human rights defenders Orn Saman and Suk Samun, who remain imprisoned as scapegoats for the killing of union leader Chea Vichea in 2004, while the real killers have never been brought to justice. As the Special Rapporteur notes, there has been little progress in managing the land crisis, with economic land concessions and urban development leading to forced evictions and land disputes. Following Cambodia's recent national election, Cambodia's political future is unclear. We welcome the public commitments to implement human rights reforms made by both of the main political parties. Increasingly, Cambodians call vocally for changes, including a justice system that protects their rights. We recommend that the Special Rapporteur prioritize judicial reform, following the framework set out in his report to the 15th session of the Human Rights Council in 2010, and beginning with a call for the release of all those who have been convicted and imprisoned unfairly. The Special Rapporteur should also pursue with the government necessary reforms related to the land crisis, including ensuring the provision of legal remedy for those displaced. Amnesty International recommends that the Memorandum of Understanding between the Government of Cambodia and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Cambodia be extended for at least 2 years to allow the Office to continue its invaluable work in the promotion and protection of human rights and support for the Special Rapporteur's work. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor next to the Social Service Agency of the Protestant Church in Germany.
Madam Vice President, Special Rapporteur, Licadeau welcomes your report and adds its voice to those who have urged the renewal of your mandate. There is a great deterioration in the human rights situation in